modified to allow for direct election of the president. This is according to the recommendations made by Chief Justice Raymond Zondo in the final state capture report. Zondo found the electoral system to be flawed, saying many wished to vote for the African National Congress but did not want Jacob Zuma as president. Earlier this month, the parliament missed the deadline for the amendment of the Electoral Act, but the court granted it a 6-month extension. For more on this, we're joined by Mandisa Shamasehiro, who is the project director on South Africa electoral reforms for the New Nation movement. Mandisa, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for joining us this morning. Is the scrapping of proportional representation, which is what we know as an electoral system in this country, really the answer in this instance, and going for a direction where South Africans can directly elect a president?
Yes, good morning. The reality is that the South African electoral system has to change, not only because it's absolutely necessary, but also to honor decisions that were taken in the past. It's time that South Africa becomes a country that honors its decisions. We might not know what all the sunset clauses in the CODESA negotiations detailed and what all the exact agreements detailed, precisely because of this dishonesty that I think really becomes a horrible heritage that we seem to be passing on. The reality is that South Africans need to be able to hold public representatives, all of them, accountable. And currently, according to Section 77, Subsection 1A in the Constitution, the president of the country is elected through Parliament, but has to be indicated on a party's list before this person can be elected in Parliament. So anybody who's put in a position in Parliament has to at first become a member of Parliament before they can be elected, even premiers. And so this leaves us at a great risk precisely because of the sectarianism and what people commonly call or wrongly call factionalism is really sectarianism, and the divisions that exist within political parties. Many of us come from political parties and are still in political parties, and it's our right, it's our constitutional right to have political views, to hold an ideology, even religious views for that matter. However, South African citizens can't be held at ransom because of my beliefs in whatever ideological framework I subscribe to. What South Africans need and what the Constitution of South Africa says is that all our Bill of Rights are protected as individuals. That's a very, very critical thing to note, because what Chief Justice Zondo has basically remarked on in his report, correctly so, is I don't think he probably had enough time to elaborate on it because the recommendations were just so many. However, the point he's trying to make is that South Africans should be able to have recourse should we discover that we have a public representative who is just not, who's a criminal basically,
right,
and who is not ethical and who is not upholding the constitutional obligations of their office and also their obligations to the citizens of South Africa and not members of their political parties.
Well, Mandisa, the system as we know it, the proportional representation arrangement that we currently have, was never meant to be the final arrangement. We know that after the 1999 elections were held, there was work conducted to start the sort of electoral reform that South Africa would then need. So why has it taken it so long? If this issue around electoral reform has always been on the table, it does seem that electoral reform has joined the list of other significant changes that South Africa needs, like land reform. So what has been behind the slow pace of change? And we'll get to the 2020 Constitutional Court judgment in a moment, but perhaps just talk to us about the slow pace of change that we're seeing.
Well, we all know how, tempting the vestiges of power can be to hold on to once you taste them. We all know that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So the African National Congress, for instance, were part of the CODESA negotiations, as I mentioned earlier. This decision was taken at the CODESA negotiations. It's not a decision that was taken during the first government of the democratic dispensation between 94 and 99. No, it was a decision mentioned, it was one of the sunset clauses which I mentioned earlier. And so my belief and my firm opinion is that once the ANC had tasted power, they obviously, started to find loopholes in the system. One of them being, like I said, not communicating to the citizens of South Africa what the sunset clauses entailed in the CODESA negotiations. Former President Thabo Mbeki did in 2002 call for the commission, which eventually led to what we all commonly now know as the Flawed report, which is a document that, as the New Nation movement, have relied on as a premise when we started approaching the constitutional, or rather the Cape High Court in 2013, to really fight for this agreement, which was an honorable agreement, to be upheld and for citizens to be taken into confidence about that agreement. But beyond that, it's also a necessary change, because South Africans do need to understand that, new as we might be to a democratic dispensation, we are also new to constitutionalism. And so the whole process of us developing our country and taking it from the negative position where we are in now, high crime, high unemployment, and violence against women and children being so excessive, and inequalities really becoming so glaringly obvious day by day, for us to move from that to a progressive position, economically and socially, we are going to have to understand that our democratic dispensation and order and constitutionalism is our responsibility. And so what we have was really just a blessing in disguise that the ANC, in fact, had suppressed this sunset clause and this CODESA-based agreement by not really wanting to activate electoral reforms, because they know that proportional representation gives them, as a political power, more opportunity to do all the things that we all now see happening. One, public representatives from the president right down to a PR councillor in a local municipality, including MPLs, not being able to be held accountable, responsible, and not being able to actually understand that there are consequences for stealing money, for lying, for defrauding the nation. And so once they smelt that power, they obviously were not going to want to readily let go of it, and that is why we had to approach the court, because the Flawed report, which was released in 2003, after being commissioned by former President Thabo Mbeki, was really not acted on. We know that in 2017, former President Kgalema Motlanthe was also tasked with a similar responsibility, but nothing came of that.
Right.
As it is in the tradition of the ANC, as most of us know, they will talk about things, make empty promises, and really not deliver, or just pretend like they want change, but not really pursue the change.
Right. So in 2002, we have former President Thabo Mbeki commissioning this inquiry into electoral reform. In 2003, we get the Flawed report, fast track to 2020 June, right? And we have the Constitutional Court now instructing Parliament, in fact, to amend the Electoral Act because it has been deemed unconstitutional, or at least sections of it have. We learned, of course, this year, not so long ago, that Parliament has, in fact, missed that deadline and requested an extension. Your thoughts on those developments, and whether or not you think this is likely to negatively impact the 2024 elections?
Yes, no, certainly it will, but more than anything, it's going to negatively impact the citizens of South Africa, who are basically robbed of an opportunity which is really almost 30 years late. Remember when former President Nelson Mandela vacated his office in 1999, he also mentioned this in his exiting speech, that the electoral reforms must happen because the decision was that only for the first 5 years, 1994 to 99, should the 100% application of proportional representation in the electoral system be relied on. And so the reality is that the citizens of South Africa, as usual, are the ones who are compromised, and we, as the citizens of South Africa, whether native citizens or settler citizens, are the ones who basically have to bear the brunt of the incompetence and the corrupt and dishonest mentality that the current government has been conducting itself over the last almost 30 years. The reality is that Parliament has now been given that that 6 months extension to do the necessary. However, as the New Nation Movement and the Citizens Parliament entity and all other smaller political formations that support constituency-based systems and greater accountability, transparency, etc., we now have no other alternative except, again, to approach the Constitutional Court and actually ask for recourse. Because remember, we are operating under a political party at national level that really doesn't understand and doesn't respect the principles of accountability, transparency, and even recourse. But the Constitutional Court needs to understand that it's not only the citizens of South Africa that have been disrespected and undermined by the 2-year period during which this ruling was issued on the 11th of June, as we state, in 2020, the 2-year period of absolutely nothing happening until the New Nation Movement wrote a letter to Parliament really threatening to go back to the Constitutional Court towards the end of last year, saying that if nothing is done, we have no other recourse alternative but to go back to the Constitutional Court. And to be honest, political work can really not be governed through the courts. However, that is really why the Constitution of the country is there and why the Constitutional Court is there, to protect our individual rights. Our rights as citizens are protected as individuals. That is why we vote in secret as individuals. And therefore, we can't, when we go to government, in a critical institution that handles a lot of resources on behalf, as custodians of the nation, on behalf of the nation, we cannot allow our individual rights again to continue to be bypassed and to be trashed on without any consequence. The Constitutional Court really needs to decide on what consequential action needs to happen. But fast forward to what to do now. Here's another reality. We are not going to have enough time to educate every household, which is what we need to do. And the Citizens Parliament, which is a campaigning mobilization movement that is establishing to give credence to the New Nation Movement litigation that victory of 2020, and go on the ground and educate. We are not going to have the time to actually go adequately and educate citizens the way we didn't have the time and were not given the time to actually mobilize citizens adequately to prepare for the public hearings, the sham of the public hearings that were held earlier this year, which was a rush decision after we had threatened the Speaker to say that we'll take it back to the Court.
Right.
Former ANC Treasurer General Phosa has come out guns blazing, proposing a radical shift in the way South Africa's president is elected. The party veteran and former Premier of Mpumalanga has called for a direct vote by the people, arguing that this would make the president more accountable. Phosa is of the view that 31 years into democracy, the status quo of a party president automatically assuming the country's presidency should be left in the past.
If you go and visit my father's house and you exchange money, what does that have to do with ANC? It's got something to do with you who's doing that thing. It's individual members of the ANC who get corrupted by criminals and work with criminals. And the sooner we accept that, the better. The sooner we stop shielding people from prosecutions, the better for this country. I think there are various levels of dealing with these problems. The president says, I've established a commission of inquiry. I'm awaiting the report. It makes sense, but the question is, what is going to happen to the report? I'm saying what should happen to the report? There must be immediate investigations and prosecutions against wrongdoing. It's very clear wrongdoing is staring us in our eyes. Those people who are implicated, from Commissioner of Police going down, from Minister of Police going down, must bear the consequences of what is happening. It happened on their watches. I think it's a matter of speculation from where I'm sitting. Mm-hmm. Because it is speculation. We don't know if Cyril is going to go, if the NEC wants him to go. But if the NEC wants Cyril to go tomorrow, they'll tell him to go tomorrow. And there's nothing he can do. Nothing. So Thabo couldn't do anything. Zuma couldn't do anything. The clouds were building against him. If the NEC wants Cyril to go tomorrow, he will go. That's what he was telling them. Stop gossiping about me. Tell me when it's time to go. I'll go. That is, if it's true what